All right, here we go. Quarantined. Who would have thunk? Wow, who would have thunk indeed? We are quarantined. Huh. Well, I'm going to be reading pages 214 to 225. Follow along if you have your book. If you don't have your book, I'll have the PDF on Google Classroom. If you choose not to do anything, I can't help. I can't do anything for you. Who would have thunk that if you choose not to do something, I can't help you? Anyways, here's 214 to 225. Follow along if you can. Kaya, off your phone. The next evening, Dad disappeared. After a couple of days, he wanted me to go with him again to some bar, but I said no. Dad got ticked off and said that if I wasn't going to team up with him, the least I can do was stake him some pool shoot money. I found myself forking over a 20 and then another in a few days. Mom had told me to expect a check in early July for the lease on her Texas land. She also warned me that Dad would try to get his hands on it. Dad actually waited at the foot of the hill for the mailman and took it from him on the day it arrived. But when the mailman told me what had happened, I ran down Little Hobart Street and caught Dad before he got into town. I told him Mom had wanted me to hide the check until she returned. "Let's hide it together," Dad said, and suggested we stash it in the 1933 World Book Encyclopedia Mom got free from the library under currency. The next day, when I went to re-hide the check, it was gone. Dad swore he had no idea what happened to it. I knew he was lying, but I also knew if I accused him, he'd deny it, and there'd be a loud yelling match that wouldn't do me any good. For the first time, I had a clear idea of what Mom was up against. Being a strong woman was harder than I had thought. Mom still had more than a month in Charleston. We were about to run out of grocery money, and my babysitting income wasn't making up the difference. I had seen a help wanted sign in the window of a jewelry store at McDowell Street called Becker's Jewel Box. I put on a lot of makeup, my best dress. It was purple with tiny white dots and a sash that tied in the back, and a pair of Mom's high heels, since we wore the same size. Then I walked around the mountain to apply for the job. I pushed open the door, jangling the bells hanging overhead. Becker's Jewel Box was a fancy store, the kind of place I never had occasion to go into, with a humming air conditioning and a buzzing fluorescent lights. Locked glass display cases held rings and necklaces and brooches, and a few guitars and banjos hung on the pine board paneled walls to diversify the merchandise. Mr. Becker was leaning on the counter with his fingers interlocked. He had a stomach so big that his thin black belt reminded me of the equator circling the globe. I was afraid that Mr. Becker wouldn't give me the job if he knew I was only 13, so I told him I was 17. He hired me on the spot for $40 a week in cash. I was thrilled. It was my first real job. Babysitting and tutoring and doing other kids' homeworks and mowing lawns and redeeming bottles and selling scrap metal didn't count. $40 a week was serious money. I liked the work. People buying jewelry were always happy, and even though Welsh was a poor town, Becker's Jewel Box had plenty of customers. Older miners buying their wives' and mother's pen, a brooch with a birthstone for each of the children, teenage couples shopping for engagement rings, the girls giggling with excitement, the boys acting proud and manly. During the slow spells, Mr. Becker and I watched the Watergate hearings on the little black and white TV. Mr. Becker was captivated by John Dean's wife, Maureen, who sat behind her husband when he was testifying and wore elegant clothes and pulled her blonde hair back in a tight bun. "Hot damn, that's one classy broad," Mr. Becker would say. Sometimes after watching Maureen Dean, Mr. Becker got so randy that he came behind me while I was cleaning the display case and rubbed up against my backside. I'd pull his hand off and walk away without saying a word, and that horn dog would return to the television as if nothing had happened. When Mr. Becker went across the street to the Mountaineer Diner for lunch, he always took the key to the display case that held the diamond rings. If customers came in wanting to look at the rings, I had to run across the street to get him. Once he forgot to take the key, and when he returned, he had a big point of counting the rings in front of me. It was his way of letting me know he didn't trust me in the slightest. One day after Mr. Becker had come back from lunch and ostentatiously checked the display cases, I was so furious that I looked around to see if there was anything in the entire darn store worth stealing. Necklaces, brooches, banjos, none of them did anything for me, and then the watch display caught my eye. I had always wanted to watch. Unlike diamonds, watches were practical. They were for people on the run, people with appointments to keep and schedules to meet. This was the kind of person I wanted to be. Dozens of watches ticked away in the counter behind the cash register. There was one in particular that made me ache. It had 4 different colored bands, black, brown, blue, and white, so you could change your watch band to match your outfit. It had a price tag of $29.95, $10 short of a week's salary, but if I wanted, it could be mine in an instant and for free. The more I thought about the watch, the more it called to me. One day, the woman who worked at the store Mr. Becker owned and wore stopped by. Mr. Becker wanted to give me some beauty tips. While she was showing me her different makeup applicators, the woman who had still platinum hair and eyelashes tarred and mascara told me I must be earning a truckload in commissions. When I asked her what she meant, she said that in addition to her $40 a week, she made 10% on every sale. Her commissions were sometimes double her salary. Hell, welfare gets you more than $40 a week, she said. If you're not getting commissions, Becker's stiffing you. Well, I asked Mr. Becker about commissions. He said they were for salespeople, and I was just an assistant. The next day, when Mr. Becker went off to the Mountaineer, I opened the display case and took out the 4-band watch. I slipped it into my handbag and rearranged the remaining watches to cover the gap. I had made plenty of sales on my own when Mr. Becker was busy. Since he hadn't paid me any commission, I was only taking what I was owed. When Mr. Becker came back from lunch, he studied the diamond display like he always did, but he didn't even glance at the watches. Walking home that evening with the watch hidden in my purse, I felt light and giddy. After dinner, I climbed into my bunk bed where no one could see me, and I tried on the watch with each of the bands, gesturing the way I figured the rich people did. Wearing the watch to work was out of the question, of course. I always realized that I could run into Mr. Becker in town at any time, so I decided that until school started, I put the watch on only at home. Then I began to wonder how I'd explain the watch to Brian and Lori and Mom and Dad. I also worried that Mr. Becker might see something thief-like in my expression. Sooner or later, he'd discover the missing watch and would question me, and I'd have to lie convincingly, which I wasn't very good at. If I wasn't convincing, I'd be sent to a reform school with people like Billy Deal. Mr. Becker would have the satisfaction of knowing he'd been right all along not to trust me. I wasn't about to give him that satisfaction. The next morning, I took the watch out of the wooden box where I kept the geode, put it in my purse, and brought it back to the store. All morning, I nervously waited for Mr. Becker to leave for lunch. When he was finally gone, I opened the display case, slipped the watch inside, and rearranged the other watches around it. I moved fast. The week before, I had stolen the watch without breaking a sweat, but now I was terrified that someone would catch me putting it back. In late August, I was washing clothes in the tin pan in the living room when I heard someone coming up the stairs singing. It was Lori. She burst into the living room, duffel bag over her shoulders, laughing and belting out one of those goofy summer camp songs kids sing at night around the fire. I'd never heard Lori cut loose like this before. She positively glowed as she told me about the hot meals and the hot showers and all of the friends she'd made. She'd even had a boyfriend who kissed her. Everyone assumed I was a normal person, she said. It was weird. Then she told me that it had occurred to her that if she got out of Welsh and away from the family, she might have a shot at a happy life. From then on, she began looking forward to the day she'd leave Little Hobart Street and be on her own. A few days later, Mom came home. She seemed different, too. She had lived in a dorm on the university campus without 4 kids to take care of, and she had loved it. She'd attended lectures and she painted. She'd read stacks of self-help books, and they all made her realize that she'd been living her life for other people. She intended to quit her teaching job and devote herself to her art. "It's time I did something for myself," she said. "It's time I started living my life for me." "Mom, you spent the whole summer renewing your certificate. If I hadn't done that, I never would have had this breakthrough." "You can't quit your job," I said. "We need the money." "Why do I always have to be the one who earns the money?" Mom asked. "You have a job. You can earn money. Lori can earn money too. I've got more important things to do." I thought Mom was having another tantrum. I assumed that come opening day she'd be off in Lucy Joe's dart to Davy Elementary, even if we had to cajole her. But on that first day of school, Mom refused to get out of bed. Lori Bryan and I pulled back the covers and tried to drag her out, but she wouldn't budge. I told her she had responsibilities. I told her child welfare might come down on us again if she wasn't working. She folded her arms across her chest and stared us down. "I'm not going to this school," she said. "Why not?" I asked. "I'm sick." "What's wrong?" I asked. My mucus is yellow," Mom said. "If everyone who had yellow mucus stayed home, the schools would be pretty empty," I told her. Mom's head snapped up. "You can't talk to me like that," she said. "I'm your mother." "If you want to be treated like a mother," I said, "you should act like one." Mom rarely got angry. She was usually either singing or crying, but now her face twisted up with fury. We both knew I had crossed a line, but I didn't care. I'd also changed over the summer. "How dare you?" she shouted. "You're in trouble now, big trouble. I'm telling your dad. Just wait until he comes home." Mother's threat didn't worry me. The way I saw it, Dad owed me. It looked like I'd looked after his kids all summer. I kept him in beer and cigarettes money, and I'd help him fleece the miner Robbie. I figured I had Dad in my back pocket. When I got home from school that afternoon, Mom was still curled up on the sofa bed, a small pile of paperbacks next to her. Dad was sitting at the drafting table rolling a cigarette. He beckoned to me to follow him into the kitchen. Mom watched us go. Dad closed the door and looked at me gravely. "Yeah, Mother claims you back-talked her?" "Yes," I said. "It's true." Yes, sir," he corrected me, but I didn't say anything. "I'm disappointed in you," he went on. "You know damn good and well that you are to respect your parents." "Dad, Mom's not sick. She's playing hooky," I said. "She has to take her obligations more seriously. She has to grow up a little." Who do you think you are?" he asked. "She's your mother." "Then why doesn't she act like one?" I looked at Dad for what felt like a very long moment. Then I blurted out, "And why don't you act like a dad?" I could see the blood surge into his face. He grabbed me by the arm. "You apologize for that comment." "Or what?" I asked. Dad shoved me against a wall. "Or by God, I'll show you who's boss around here." His face was inches from mine. "What are you going to do? Punish me?" I asked. Stop taking me to bars." Dad drew back his hand as if to smack me. "You watch your mouth, young lady. I can still whip your butt, and don't think I won't." "You can't be serious," I said. Dad dropped his hand. He pulled his belt out of the loops of his work pants and wrapped it a couple of times around his knuckles. "Apologize to me and your mother," he said. "No." Dad raised the belt. "Apologize." "No." "Then bend over." Dad was standing between me and the door. There was no way out except through him, but it never occurred to me to either run or fight. The way I saw it, he was in a tighter spot than I was. He had to back down because if he sided with Mom and gave me a whipping, he would lose me forever. We stared at each other. Dad seemed to be waiting for me to drop my eyes to apologize and tell him I was wrong so he could go back to being like we were, but I kept holding his gaze. Finally, to call his bluff, I turned around, bent over slightly, and rested my hands on my knees. I expected him to turn and walk away, but there were 6 stinging blows on the back of my thighs, each accompanied by a whistle of wind. I could feel the welts rising even before I straightened up. I walked out of the kitchen without looking at Dad. Mom was outside the door. She'd been standing there, listening to everything. I didn't look at her, but I could see from the corner of my eye her triumphant expression. I bit my lips so I wouldn't cry. As soon as I got outside, I ran into the woods, pushing tree branches and wild grapevines out of my face. I thought I'd start crying now that I was away from the house, but instead I threw up. I ate some wild mint to get rid of the taste of bile, and I walked for what felt like hours through the silent hills. The air was chill and cool, and the forest floor was thick with leaves that had fallen from the buckeyes and poplars. Late in the afternoon, I sat down on the tree trunk, leaning forward because the backs of my thighs still stung. Although all through the long walk, the pain had kept me thinking, and by the time I reached the tree trunk, I had made two decisions. The first was that I had my last whipping. No one was ever going to do that to me again. The second was that, like Lori, I was going to get out of Welsh. The sooner the better. Before I finished high school, if I could. I had no idea where I would go, but I did know I was going. I also knew it would not be easy. People got stuck in Welsh. Excuse me. I had been counting on Mom and Dad to get us out, but I now knew I had to do it on my own. It would take saving and planning. I decided the next day I'd go to G.C. Murphy and buy a pink plastic piggy bank I'd seen there. I'd put in the $75 I had managed to save while working at Becker's Jewel Box. It would be the beginning of my escape fund. Almost done. That fall, two guys showed up in Welsh who were different from anyone I've ever met. They were filmmakers from New York City, and they'd been sent to Welsh as part of the government program to bring cultural uplift to Royal Appalachia. Their names are Ken Fink and Bob Gross. At first, I thought they were joking. Ken Fink and Bob Gross, as far as I was concerned, they might as well have said that their names were Ken Stupid and Bob Ugly. But Ken and Bob weren't joking. They didn't think their names were funny at all, and they didn't smile when I asked if they were putting me on. Ken and Bob both talked so fast, their conversations filled with references to people I'd never heard of, like Stanley Kubrick or Woody Allen, that it was sometimes hard to follow them. Although they had no sense of humor about their names, Ken and Bob did like to joke a lot. It wasn't the sort of Welsh high humor I was used to. Pull-out jokes and guys cupping their hands under their armpits to make fart noises. Ken and Bob had this smart, competitive way of joking where one would make a wisecrack and the other would have a comeback, and the first would have a retort to the comeback. They could keep it up until my head spun. One weekend, Ken and Bob showed a Swedish film in the school auditorium. It was a shot in black and white and had subtitles and the plot heavy on symbolism, so fewer than a dozen people came, even though it was free. Afterwards, Lori showed Ken and Bob some of her illustrations. They told her she had talent and said if she was serious about becoming an artist, she needed to go to New York City. It was a place of energy and creativity and intellectual stimulation, the likes of which we'd never seen. It was filled with people who, because they were such unique individuals, didn't fit in anywhere else. The night Lori and I lay in our rope beds and discussed New York City, the things I had heard always made it sound like big, noisy place with a lot of pollution and mobs of people in suits elbowing one another on the sidewalks. But Lori began to see New York as a sort of emerald city, this glowing, bustling place at the end of a long road where she could become the person she was meant to be. What Lori liked most about Ken and Bob's description was that the city attracted people who were different. Lori was about as different as it was possible to be in Welsh. While almost all the other kids wore jeans, Converse sneakers, and t-shirts, she showed up in the school in army boots, a white dress with white polka dots, and a jean jacket with dark poetry she'd painted on the back. The other kids threw bars of soap at her, pushed one another into her path, and wrote graffiti about her on the bathroom walls. In return, she cursed them out in Latin. At home, she read and painted late into the night, by candlelight or kerosene lamp, if the electricity was turned off. She liked Gothic details, mist hanging over the silent lake, gnarled roots heaving up from the earth, a solitary crow in the branches of a bare tree in the shoreline. I thought Lori was amazing, and I had no doubts that she had become a successful artist, but only if she could get to New York. I decided I wanted to go there, too, and that winter we came up with a plan. Lori would leave by herself for New York in June. After she graduated, she'd settle in, find a place for us, and I'd follow her as soon as I could. I told Lori about my escape fund, the $75 I'd saved For now on, I said, it would be our joint fund. We take on extra work after school and put everything we earned into that piggy bank. Lori could take it to New York and use it to get established so that by the time I arrived, everything would be set. Lori had always made very good posters for football rallies, for the plays the drama club put on, the candidates running for student council. Now she started doing commissioned posters for $1.50 a piece. She was too shy to solicit orders, so I did it for her. Lots of kids at Welsh High wanted customized posters to hang on their bedroom walls of their boyfriends and girlfriends' names, of their cars, or their astrological sign of their favorite band. Lori designed the names in big, fat, overlapping three-dimensional letters, like the kind on rock albums, then painted them in day-glow colors, outlined in India ink so that the letters popped and surrounded them with stars and dots and squiggly lines that made the letters seem like they were moving. The posters were so good that word of mouth spread, and soon Lori had such a backlog of orders that she was up working until 1 or 2 every morning. I made money babysitting and doing other kids' homeworks. I did book reports, science essays, and math. I charged $1 per assignment and guaranteed at least an A- for the customer were entitled to a full refund. After school, I babysat for $1 an hour and could usually do their homework then. I also tutored kids for $2 an hour. We told Brian about the escape fund and he pitched in, even though he hadn't included him in our plans because he was only in the 7th grade. He mowed lawns or chopped wood or cut hillside weeds with a scythe. He worked after school until the sun went down and all day Saturday and Sunday and came home with his arms and face scratched from the brush he'd cleared. Without looking for thanks or praise, he quietly added his earnings to the pig, which we named Oz. We kept Oz on the old sewing machine in the bedroom. Oz had no plugged hole on the bottom, and the slot at the top was too narrow to work bills out, even if you used a knife. So once you'd put money into Oz, it stayed there. We tested it to make sure. We couldn't count the money, but because Oz was translucent, we could see our cash accumulating inside when we held him in the light. One day that winter, when I came home from school, a gold Cadillac Coupe de Ville was parked in front of the house. I wondered if the welfare agency found some millionaires to be our foster parents and they had arrived to take us away, but Dad was inside the house, twirling a set of keys on his fingers. He explained that the Cadillac was the new official Wells family vehicle. Mom was carrying on about how it was the thing to live in a 3-room shack with no electricity, since there was a certain dignity in poverty. But to live in a 3-room shack and own a gold Cadillac meant you were a bona fide poor white trash. How'd you get it? I asked Dad. One hell of a good poker hand, he said, and an even better bluff. We'd owned a couple of cars since we'd been in Welsh, but they were true buckets of bolts, with shuddering engines and cracked windshields, and as we drove along, we could see the blur of the asphalt through the rusted-out floor panels. Those cars never lasted more than a couple of months, and like the Oldsmobile we'd driven from Phoenix, we never named them, much less got them registered and inspected. The Coupe de Ville actually had an unexpired inspection sticker. It was such a beauty that Dad declared the time had come to revive the tradition of naming our cars. That there caddy, he said, strikes me as Elvis. It crossed my mind that Dad ought to sell Elvis and use the money to install an indoor toilet or buy us all new clothes. The black leather shoes I had bought for 40 cents from Dollar General store were held together with safety pins, which I tried to blacken with a magic marker so you wouldn't notice them. I'd also use magic markers to make colored blotches on my legs, and I hoped would camouflage the holes in my pants. I figured that was less noticeable than if I sewed on patches. I had one blue pair and one green pair, so my legs, when I took my pants off, were covered with blue and green spots. But Dad loved Elvis too dearly to consider selling it, and the truth was I loved Elvis almost as much. Elvis was long and sleek as a racing yacht. It had air conditioning, gold shag upholstery, windows that went up and down with the push of a button, and a working turning signal, so Dad didn't have to stick his arm out. Every time we drove through the town in Elvis, I'd nod graciously and smile at the people on the sidewalk, feeling like an heiress. You've got true noble oblige, Mountain Goat, Dad would say. Mom grew to love Elvis too. She hadn't gone back to teaching and instead spent her time painting, and on the weekends we began to drive to craft fairs all throughout West Virginia, shows where bearded men in overalls played dulcimers and women in granny dress sold corn cob back scratchers and coal sculptures of black bears and miners. We filled Elvis's truck with Mom's paintings and tried to sell them at the fairs. Mom also drew pastel portraits on the spot for anyone willing to pay $18, and every now and again she got a commission. We all slept in Elvis and on those trips because a lot of the times we made only enough to pay for the gas and not even that. Still, it felt good to be on the move again. Our trips in Elvis reminded me how easy it was to pick up and move on when the urge struck. Once you've resolved to go, there was nothing to it at all. That was it. That's all the way to 225. I will have answers to the questions for this section in just a little bit. See you then.